The day started like most others with the rhythmic hum of the washing machine in the background and the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. Lisa sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a catalog. She didn't need the glossy pages, provided a brief escape from the dullness of her life. 50 wasn't old, she reminded herself, but it certainly felt that way when every day blurred into the next. I would like to invite you to subscribe to our channel. And like our videos, every click of yours is valuable to us as it gives us more motivation to continue sharing more meaningful stories with you. If you like our content, we encourage you to share and leave questions below. Every interaction is a way to build a closer and more connected community, and I invite you to stay with us until the end of the video. I am very grateful to you. Her husband, Tom, had left early that morning for another business trip. He had barely muttered a goodbye as he grabbed his suitcase and left the sound of the front door closing echo through the house Lisa had grown used to. The emptiness, the kind of silence that creeps in when two people forget how to talk to each other. Their conversations had become transactional: grocery lists, bills, the occasional obligatory "how was your day?" that neither of them truly cared to answer. That was why, on a whim, she had ordered something she hadn't dared to in years. The silky set had arrived in a plain brown package earlier that week, and Lisa had been too timid to open it. Until today, she took the box to her bedroom, half excited, half embarrassed. What was she doing? Tom barely noticed when she wore makeup, let alone anything provocative. Still, as she slid the fabric over her skin, a spark of something she couldn't quite name, flickered to life. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps and smoothing the delicate lace against her body. It hugged her in ways that felt unfamiliar but exhilarating. For the first time in years, she saw more than just Tom's wife. For Aunt Lisa, she saw a woman, one who still had something to offer. She ran her fingers along the delicate edge of the silky fabric, letting the texture glide beneath her fingertips. A soft smile played on her lips as she gazed at her reflection in the mirror, her cheeks faintly tinged with color. The garment hugged her in a way that felt both daring and unfamiliar. A quiet indulgence she hadn't allowed herself in years. Just as she leaned in closer, inspecting the fine lace trim, the sharp chime of the doorbell shattered. The moment Lisa flinched, her heart leaping into her throat, as if she'd been caught doing something illicit. Her gaze darted to the clock on the wall, and a small frown creased her brow. She wasn't expecting anyone. The package she had ordered earlier that week wasn't due until tomorrow. Scrambling, she snatched up her robe from the bed and slipped it. Hastily, the satin of her lingerie still cool against her skin. Beneath it, she tightened the rob's belt and hurried. Not thought her hands trembling slightly. One last glance at the mirror betrayed her flustered state. Her cheeks glowed with a telltale blush, and her hair had an unruly softness that gave away how she had spent her afternoon. She took a deep breath and made her way to the door, her bare feet padding lightly against the hardwood floor, probably just the delivery guy running ahead of schedule, she thought, or maybe a neighbor needing something. But as she pulled open the door, her assumption dissolved. It wasn't a strange, it was Evan. "Hey, Aunt Lisa?" he greeted with that effortless, boyish grin that she remembered so well. Evan stood on the doorstep, tall and imposing, his presence somehow larger than she had anticipated. At 22, he had grown into a man, though traces of the boy he used to be lingered in. The way his smile curled his damp, dark hair clung to his forehead, beads of sweat trailing down his temples. Evidence of hard work. Outdoors, his broad shoulders stretched the seams of his t-shirt, and the faint, earthy scent of grass and sun followed him inside. "Sorry to drop by without warning," he said, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand. "I just came to grab those tools. Uncle Tom borrowed last week. I figured I'd stop by on my way home." Lisa blinked momentarily, thrown by his sudden appearance. "Oh, Evan, hi." She managed her voice a little unsteady as she instinctively pulled her robe tighter around her frame. It had been months since she'd seen him, not since the family barbecue. Last summer, the tools, she repeated absently. her mind racing to keep upright the tools. "They're in the garage, thanks," he replied. Stepping inside without hesitation, his boots made faint scuffs on the door, a detail Lisa fixated on as she worked to steady. Herself, she closed the door behind him, but couldn't help noticing the way he seemed to fill the room with his presence. When had he become this adult version of himself? He wasn't the lanky teenager who used to lounge in her basement glued to his video games. A bag of chips perpetually at his side, somewhere along the way, he had transformed. Evan tilted his head, his warm brown eyes narrowing slightly in concern. Okay, Aunt Lisa. You look, I don't know, a little flustered?" His tone was casual, but there was a note of curiosity laced within it, as if he had picked up on her nervous energy. Lisa let out a nervous laugh waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, I'm fine, just tidying up, you know how it is." Her voice was a little higher than usual, and she winced internally at the transparency of her lie. "The tools are in the garage. Let me grab them for you." Evan held up a hand, flashing her an easy smile. "No need, I can grab them myself. Don't trouble yourself." No, it's fine," Lisa insisted, quickly. Already moving toward the hallway that led to the garage, the last thing she wanted was for him to wander around and stumble across the open lingerie box she'd left on the kitchen counter. Evan trailed behind her, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his worn jeans. She was acutely aware of his presence, the faint sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet as they walked side by side. His gaze, steady and unyielding, lingered on her back, sending an unbidden shiver down her spine, a sensation that both unsettled and intrigued her. Once they reached the garage, Lisa stepped forward and gestured toward the corner where a red metal toolbox sat on a dusty workbench. "Here it is," she said, her voice steady, though her heart beat slightly faster. "Everything Tom borrowed should be in there. I made sure to put it all back last week." "Thanks, Evan," replied, his voice warm and casual as he crouched beside the toolbox. He opened the lid, his movements fluid yet deliberate, his broad shoulders flexing as he sifted through the assortment of tools. She watched him silently leaning against the doorway, her arms crossed in an attempt to appear nonchalant. But she couldn't stop her eyes from wandering. He had changed so much in what felt like no time at all. His once boyish face was sharper now, framed by a jawline that hinted at maturity. The ease with which he moved, the quiet confidence he exuded, it was magnetic in a way she hadn't anticipated. It left her feeling unmowed a little, unsteady. She cleared her throat, desperate to fill the silence before it became too heavy. So she began her tone-light but forced house school. Evan glanced up the corners of his mouth, lifting into a small smile. "Good," he said simply. "Actually, I graduated last month." "Graduated," Lisa blinked, her surprise genuine. "Oh, Evan, that's wonderful. Why didn't anyone tell me he—" shrugged, his expression softening with a hint of shyness. "It's not a big deal," he said, brushing off her excitement. "Just a 2-year program, but thanks, it feels good to be done." Lisa frowned slightly, guilt creeping into her chest. When it had the gap between her and her family widened so much, why hadn't she known this milestone was coming? "You should have said something," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "We could have celebrated. You've worked so hard." Evan stood up then, brushing his hands off on his jeans before meeting her gaze. There was a spark of something unreadable in his eyes, a warmth that made her breath catch. "Well," he said, his tone shifting to something lighter, more playful, "maybe we can celebrate now?" Lisa tilted her head, confused now. "Yeah," he replied, his voice casual, but the intensity of his eyes betrayed him. "If you're free, I'd love to take you out for coffee or something. Just a little thank you for everything you've done for me." She stared at him, caught off guard. "Coffee," she repeated as, though the word itself were foreign. Evan nodded, a slow, easy grin spreading across his face. "You've always been there for me, Aunt Lisa. I feel like I owe you at least that much." She hesitated, her mind racing. His words were genuine, his tone sincere, and yet the suggestion, so simple on the surface, made her stomach flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. "You deserve a break," he added gently, his voice softening further. "Just an hour, unless of course you've got other plans." A soft laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Plans?" she echoed, shaking her head. "No, not really." His grin widened, and he took a small step closer. "Great," he said, his voice infused with quiet confidence. "It's a date." Then the word hung between them, heavier than either of them seemed ready to acknowledge. Lisa's breath hitched, and for a moment the air seemed to thrum within spoken energy. In that fleeting second, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in what felt like an eternity. The feeling was exhilarating and terrifying, even after Evan left the garage. The echo of his words and the subtle intensity of his gaze lingered. Tom's return home that evening brought no relief. Their exchanges had become routine, devoid of warmth or depth, reduced to mundane discussions about schedules and errands. If he noticed her distraction, he gave no sign of it, and Lisa, consumed by the strange new emotions stirring within her, wondered bitterly if he even cared enough to notice it all. Evan, however, refused to let Lisa retreat into herself. At first his messages were light and casual, brief updates about his day at work, snapshots of colorful sunsets, and little jokes that managed to coax a smile from her, even as she wrestled with her inner turmoil. But as the days turned into weeks, his tone shifted. His texts grew more thoughtful, more deliberate, as if he were carefully crafting a bridge to reach her. "I can't stop thinking about our coffee." I read one message, straightforward yet charged with unspoken emotion. Another came unexpectedly late at night. "You're amazing. Don't ever let anyone make you forget that." Each time Evan's name lit up her screen, Lisa's heart would pound uncontrollably. She told herself repeatedly that she needed to draw a line to set a boundary that couldn't be crossed. Yet, instead of shutting him out, she found herself replying. Her responses, once brief and guarded, began to lengthen. She wrote with a warmth and candor she hadn't allowed herself to express in years. Slowly, she let her walls come down, one carefully placed brick at a time. Then came the message that changed everything. "Can I see you again?" Just as Lisa's breath caught as she read the words, her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out every rational thought. Her fingers hovered hesitantly over the screen as she wrestled with the familiar pull of caution and the thrilling tug of desire before she could talk herself out of it. She typed a single word tomorrow and hit send the next evening, true to his word. Evan pulled up in his car to pick her up when she stepped outside and slid into the passenger seat. He greeted her with a wide grin that made his eyes sparkle, like sunlight glinting off water. "You look incredible," he said softly, his deep voice carrying a weight of sincerity that made her heart skip a beat. Lisa glanced down at her simple outfit, a plain blouse paired with her favorite jeans, and felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You're too kind," she replied, her voice trembling slightly as she tried to mask the fluttering excitement stirring within her. Evan drove them to a secluded park on the outskirts of town, a place he had discovered years ago and often returned to when he needed peace. It was a haven quiet and serene, where tall trees swayed gently in the evening. Breeze and the rhythmic chirping of crickets filled the air. The fading sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the ground. They strolled along a narrow winding trail that snaked through the woods, their steps unhurried, their conversation flowing naturally. Laughter punctuated their words, echoing softly in the stillness around them. Evan recounted amusing anecdotes from his college day stories, filled with youthful ambition, missteps, and humor. Lisa listened, smiling at his enthusiasm, and in turn she opened up about her own past, sharing glimpses of a younger, more carefree version of herself, a version she rarely spoke about, even to herself, as they reached a clearing where a small bench sat beneath an old oak tree. Evan suddenly stopped walking. His laughter faded and his expression turned thoughtful, almost hesitant. "I don't think I've ever seen you like this," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Lisa pause, like what she asked. Turning to face him happy, he replied, simply. His words hung in the air, their honesty catching her off guard. Lisa looked at him, startled by the intensity of his gaze. It was as if he were searching for something ins spoken in her eyes. She felt her cheeks flush and quickly glanced away, her fingers instinctively fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I don't know if I'd call it that," she murmured, her voice soft. "I would," he said, stepping closer to her. His tone was steady, almost reverent. "You light up when you laugh. It's beautiful." Lisa's breath hitched at his words. The sincerity in his voice made her heart race, and the air between them seemed to grow heavier. There was an undeniable tension now, a fragile thread binding them. In a moment that felt too significant to ignore Evan, she began, her voice uncertain, but he interrupted gently. "This is wrong," he said for her, as though reading her mind. Lisa's chest tightened. She forced herself to meet his eyes, her own filled with conflict. "Because I don't feel that way." "Evan," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm your aunt. This can't happen, but it's already happening." He countered, his voice low but unwavering. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was light, fleeting, but it sent a jolt through her, igniting something she had tried to suppress. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he added, his tone almost pleading. Lisa wanted to retreat, to deny everything, and create a wall between them that couldn't be crossed, but she couldn't. Her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch, even as her mind screamed for her to stop. "I don't know what I feel," she whispered, her words barely audible. "Then let me show you," he said softly, his hand lifting to cup her cheek. The warmth of his touch sent shivers down her spine. Their eyes locked, and for a moment it felt as though time had ceased to exist. The world around them dissolved, leaving only the two of them in that fragile, forbidden moment. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Evan leaned in, his lips brushed against hers in a kiss so delicate it was barely there, as though he was afraid of shattering the moment Lisa froze, every instinct telling her to pull away to end this before it went any further. But the years of loneliness, the buried emotions, and the aching need for connection overwhelmed her. Her heart surged forward, silencing her mind, and